Hello, SGD here, and I'd like to present a video, and I'll put a link in the description because this was related to a series I did earlier, Magic Wands, but basically so people like, or gods like Hermes, Thoth in Egypt, Shamash, and well, so many others across the ancient world, these important gods, and then later important rulers being, or carrying, or for instance, Thoth, Hermes were gods of weights and measure. The scepter and orb still being a powerful symbol amongst royalty, or Hammurabi, as well, kings, queens have the exclusive power to describe what the official weights and measures are. So many applications. I'll put the link to that series in the description, but I just want to take a little bit further this something I mentioned in that series, but take it a little bit further, and the wisdom of Thoth, the Egyptian god of knowledge and of weights and measures, also a moon god and a few other aspects, but we'll have a look at this. And so Thoth, sometimes the different descriptions I'll be using. Thoth is said to have taught the ancient Egyptians the craft of building. So their temples, the pyramids, this knowledge was directly from Thoth, as go the stories. Now, the craft, who are the heirs to the craft, who are most connected to the symbols, the rituals, and the craft itself? Well, the craft guilds, and better known now as Freemasons. And so we'll have a look at a few connections, how the ancient and the modern have a continuing tradition. So here we have Thoth with the ibis, the sacred ibis of the African white ibis, and he's, well, again, the ankh he's feeding. But he has these two rods. Now that's an important feature, and so with the two snakes, just like the caduceus of Hermes or Mercury, with the two snakes about them being symbols of measurement. And well, what is knowledge? Science begins with measurement. So one of the still now, observation, measurement being a fundamental of the scientific method, and well, the craft, construction, observation, astronomy, all of it comes back to measurement systems. And so we focus on these two figures and the snakes, and they're both wearing two different crowns. Now that's the crown of Upper Egypt, and that's the crown of Lower Egypt. Here they're shown separately, but if we look at the Nama palette, or King Nama or King Mina, at least according to the official records, this Nama palette depicts King Nama or Nima reuniting the North and the South Kingdom. Now it's interesting that officially Egyptian civilization begins with the reunification of the North and South Kingdom, implying that there's an older one there, but just also might be worth mentioning. So we see 1, 2, 3, 4 of these, very much like Hathor. I forget the other name for this bull cow god, but if you look, there are 4 columns here as well, and they have that same cow depiction on there. There's a lot of interesting stuff here, and I'm going to do some other follow-up videos, especially in regards to some nice geometry that's encoded here. But what we have is one crown, and there we see the second crown. Now in other depictions you'll see these two crowns have been unified, so it's this more sort of rounded hat of a crown is worn in combination with this one. So we see that the pharaoh has the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt there, because that's, again, so if we focus on that part, so we see this crown with that swirl coming off it, and this crown, and there we see them there as well on this famous depiction, Upper and Lower Egypt. But well, these rods, they're slightly offset, and they're offset, well, 6 degrees. Well, one, for instance, when we go to the Luxor Karnak temple, we see the main alignment, and then there's a 6-degree offset, so then that points off towards Karnak, that it's, again, 6 degrees off, and this is a very standard feature, and there are a few other references to it in Egypt. But for instance, in regards to sacred geometry, town planning, and architecture, so Canberra, Australian Capital Territory, this is the capital city of Australia, and again, it's just embedded with this in geometry. It's Australia's version of Washington DC. Even amongst the hardcore skeptics, they can't really deny the use of sacred geometry and architecture in the building, but it's very difficult for them to admit it in any other sort of broad sense. But this is Northbourne Avenue, the main street in, and it is 6 degrees from true north. Now if you go to Sydney, Lachlan Macquarie, conscientious Freemason, not just a member, but even in all the biographies is described as a conscientious Freemason, a practitioner of a craft, let's say. Now, Macquarie Street and the main exit, so he redesigned Sydney, but so many other places, but Macquarie Street is, again, 6 degrees off true north. And the first township that he also he redesigned Parramatta, which was the second town in Australia, but the township of Liverpool, which he officially opened on the 7th of November, the 7th day of the 11th month, but that also we also have Macquarie Street, and that is also, amongst other features, and well, anyway, that is also 6 degrees from true north, which brings us to Washington. Now, I've covered it earlier. It's always been, well, I'm sure of it, that the reason that the Washington Monument, not only because it's at 6 degrees off the alignment, so it's often said it was put there because of boggy ground. Well, I'm not so sure about that, because it's 377 feet off 377 feet. That's just, again, a constant. In the ancient world and the modern world, this is a very important number. It's Fibonacci for one reason, but it's also 6 degrees off alignment from, for instance, from the White House. It should be directly south, but it's 6 degrees off. And of course, George Washington, a conscientious Freemason, just like Lachlan Macquarie, very much into survey and measurement and all these other aspects. And, well, the Washington Monument did a video again on all the plaques that are around there, which include the Oddfellows and the Mechanics and Freemasons. And this is an interesting plaque because we have the Grand Lodge of Masons of Maryland. And what do we have? Who do we have? Well, it's this Kronos figure with the scythe, which is an important one, the broken column. But here it's, well, what do we have? We have this, seem to have Thoth depicted once more. So that's one interesting connection. But the US dollar bill, and the very important, well, it's, you know, the 13 arrows, 13, well, again, we have this 13 points, all of that. But here we have this famous pyramid with the all-seeing eye as a capstone. And I just sort of did a detour. I've been doing videos on cornerstones and that. It will come back to this because it's connected, but just to mix it up a bit for the moment. And what do we have with this pyramid? What's one of it? Well, it's 13 levels for one thing. That's another important point. But we come back to this, again, this ancient Egyptian raising the Jed, and it's always at an angle. And what angle is it at? Well, the angle just seems to match this rod, one of the rods that is held by Thoth here. And it's at 23.5, 23.4, you know, but that is the tilt of the Earth. And that's very important for two reasons. Firstly, it's what causes the seasons, but it's also directly related to this very important, again, constant of precession, because of the tilt of the Earth. At the moment, the North Star, Polaris, but over a 25,920 year cycle, the North Star moves, and this is mapped out by the Great Pyramid, for instance. This tracking the North Star, very important feature, and shows that they have a very high level of astronomical knowledge. But it goes a little bit further, because if you can bring back to the pyramid on the US dollar bill, it also matches that very, very important angle of the seasons and of precession. However, it's also, what's interesting is we have this shaded part on the side. But that brings us back to, so again, the dollar bill and the 6 degrees. Again, we see 6 degrees on there. Well, it's just interesting that 23.5 plus 6 degrees is 29.5. And why is this number 29.5 important? Well, for more than a few reasons. But for instance, it's the number 108 being connected to the Sun, Earth, and Moon. But there's another very important one, I think, actually look more beautiful, because it's a combination of time and relationships of distance. And so, for instance, the Synodic month, that's the basis for the 30-day month, that we have the 30-day calendar. Now, a Synodic month, there are a few, for instance, there are actually two main types of month: the Synodic and the sidereal. But just to focus on the Synodic now, and so the Synodic month brings together the Sun, the Earth, and the Moon, because one orbit of the Moon around the Earth in relation to the Sun that's how we measure the Synodic month. A sidereal is a relationship of Earth, Moon, and stars. The Synodic month of 29.5 days is Sun, Earth, and Moon. So that's as an example. That's how we measure the Synodic month. But that's 29.53, give or take, because of the elliptical nature of things. Which, anyway, well, that's a relationship of time, Sun, Earth, and Moon. However, if you multiply the diameter of the Earth by 29.53, you get the distance from the Earth to the Moon. So time, 29.53 days, and distance, 29.53 days. Again, give or take a fraction because of the elliptical nature of things. That's an average, 29.53. And, well, just coincidentally, that's the angular information we're getting there. And it's interesting to note that Thoth is also a moon god. Now, did the Egyptians have a 360-degree compass? There is no solid information for that. However, they did have a 12-hour division of their days. For instance, this ancient Egyptian sundial divides a day into 12 units. And why did they pick 12? If you look at the Sumerians, and for instance, they were using 60 units to measure so many things, and of course 12 and 60 minutes per hour, 60 seconds. Well, just like the Romans and the Mayans as well, because the Romans inherited their calendar from the Egyptians, but for instance, the Mayans had a 360-day calendar plus 5 days, so 365, but there was a 13th month of 5 days, which was considered a unlucky time to begin new enterprises. For instance, but the Egyptians had 3 seasons, which related to the flood cycle of the Nile, so 3 seasons of 120 days or 12 months of 30 days, just like now, based on this, essentially every 30th day we have a new moon, a new full moon. And then they also had this addition of 5 days. So they did understand the solar cycles, but they still based it more on this lunar. So 360 days is an interesting connection, but certainly by no means is this proof. But it's like with so much, it's worth rethinking it because of these coincidences that sort of just keep popping up. So yeah, so Sun, Earth, and Moon, the Synodic month, the full moons, which is so important in measuring, well, still all over the place, the lunar calendar and the solar calendar. A lot of cultures still keep them. For instance, the Jewish calendar is still based on the lunar cycles, or the Chinese, they have a Lunar New Year, this type of thing. And these important observations, even so for instance, is it when Ramadan starts? It starts when the full moon is sighted. So this is a constant across time, across cultures as well. And just like the use of 108 being this lovely number which connects Sun, Earth, and Moon, 29.53 also does, but it connects it not just in a relationship of distance, but in a relationship of time. Length is a unit of measure, time is a unit of measure, Thoth, Hermes, etc., gods of weights and measures. So we see time and measure, like the clock or the ruler. So Thoth, the moon god, god of weights and measures. And could this be because at the same time that at least official history has it that Egypt was rising, so were the Sumerians using this units based on 12 or 60. And for 12, for instance, a 12-inch foot, why 12? Because you can divide that into thirds and quarters. Unlike the base 10 system, you can't divide it into thirds. You get this, 3.333333. sort of run on. So that's why it was a very handy tool, but also these other aspects I think are worth considering. Anyways, with that, hope you enjoyed. Have a good one. Check it out.